I bled out while my parents partied at my sister's gala. I bled out in a private hospital room while my parents toasted champagne on the rooftop of the W Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. That's not the worst part. The worst part is, they didn't even lie about it afterward. My sister Savannah received a humanitarian award that night. She wore a beaded gold gown, posed beside a massive floral arch, and thanked our beautiful family for their unwavering support as I slipped in and out of consciousness with a ruptured cyst. Alone. My name is Bailey McKnight. I'm 30 years old. I live in Santa Barbara and work as a risk strategist for a boutique investment firm. Most of my clients are people like my father, used to pretend to be quietly wealthy, meticulously discreet, allergic to public failure. I was raised in a family obsessed with appearances. My mother, Caroline, built her life around society circles, charity boards, and social media filters. My father, Stephen, I learned long ago that silence was the easiest form of survival. And Savannah, my older sister by 2 years, I was born for the spotlight. She didn't chase attention. It followed her like perfume. I didn't resent that growing up. I just assumed every family had a golden child. I just didn't know they'd all agreed it wasn't me. I had been pushing through abdominal pain for nearly 2 days. The kind of pain that makes you stop mid-sentence and grip the edge of your desk until the wave passes. I had a client presentation the next morning, and I couldn't afford to call out. So I pushed. I drank warm water. I told myself it was stress, or maybe bad takeout, until I collapsed at my apartment, alone, and woke up in an ambulance. They said it was a ruptured ovarian cyst. Something common enough, but complicated by internal bleeding. My blood pressure was crashing. I remember the ER doctor leaning over me, asking if there was anyone they could call. My mother's phone went straight to voicemail. My father's line rang, then cut. Savannah picked up on the third ring, and I used what little breath I had left to say, "I'm in the hospital. It's serious," she sighed, loudly. "Bailey, it's gala night. You can't pull this right now." Before I could respond, she hung up. The next thing I remember is fluorescent lights, a nurse adjusting the IV line, and the tight ache across my abdomen from surgery. My vitals were stable, but I'd flatlined for nearly a minute and a half, 73 seconds without a heartbeat. That's what the surgeon, Dr. Lennox, told me, in the kind of voice doctors reserve for telling you something unbelievable but medically precise. When he left the room, I opened my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Just a tag notification from Savannah on Instagram. The photo showed her on stage, radiant in gold, holding the award while our parents stood behind her, beaming like it was a coronation. The caption read, "What a night. Family is everything. Couldn't have done this without you." The timestamp matched the exact window when I was unconscious. I stared at the screen until the nurse returned. She smiled and said, "Your sister called the nurse's desk. Said she hopes you're feeling better, and asked if you can Venmo her for the after-party deposit." That was the moment something in me changed. It wasn't rage. Rage would have been easier. It was more like detachment. Like a wire had been quietly cut. I didn't answer. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling and thought, I almost died. And they wouldn't have even noticed. People always say that near-death moments give you clarity, but they never tell you how cold that clarity feels. Like waking up in a house you used to call home and realizing all the furniture has been moved without your consent. I wasn't angry yet. I was just empty. And that emptiness told me what no one else ever had. I was expendable to the people I'd once bled for. I reached for my phone again and opened my banking app. I looked at the shared accounts I'd managed for years, the ones my parents had access to just in case. I didn't touch them yet. I wasn't ready for war. But I did open my notes app and type a single sentence, 73 seconds. That's how long it took for everything to become clear. I didn't know then that it would become the title of something bigger. I just knew I wouldn't give them another second without making them earn it. 3 days after surgery, I was released from the hospital with a prescription for pain meds, a stack of paperwork, and a hollow feeling in my chest I couldn't name yet. Noah picked me up. He worked with me at the firm and had been quietly checking in since the night I collapsed. He didn't ask questions. He just drove, making sure my bag was in the back seat and the seat warmers were on. When we reached my apartment, he helped me upstairs and stocked my fridge while I lay still on the couch, not quite ready to process how much had changed. I had given my family every part of me they ever asked for. I co-signed their mortgages. I paid off credit cards when Mom's boutique fundraisers ran over budget. I covered the property taxes on the Malibu condo Savannah used for influencer weekends. I answered calls at midnight to help Dad understand business documents he pretended to comprehend. I smiled through it all, because that's what the quiet daughter does. The one who doesn't make noise. The one who fixes the messes but never appears in the family photos. The day after I got home, a courier arrived with a thick envelope from my parents' accountant. No noche? No call. Just a yellow sticky, labeled urgent. Inside were requests for digital authorizations, financial statements, and updated signature forms. I stared at them, trying to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe they hadn't understood how serious things were. Maybe they thought I was overreacting. But the truth was simpler than that. They just didn't care. They had never cared. Not in the way that mattered. That afternoon, I called the hospital records department and requested copies of every form signed on the night of my surgery. Something had been gnawing at me since I'd read the discharge summary. It listed Savannah as my medical proxy. I had never given her that authority. A few hours later, the forms arrived by secure link. There it was, her signature above mine. My name electronically signed, time-stamped during my surgery. I hadn't touched a device that night. I had been intubated. My hands were strapped to the table. I sent the forms to Elena, my attorney, with a single message. Tell me what they did. She responded 20 minutes later with a voice note. Her tone calm, but clipped. The signature had been forged. Savannah had submitted it from the Gala's green room using my medical profile. Legally, that could mean fraud. Ethically, it was monstrous. She had authorized hospital staff to keep the family informed, but also signed a waiver that no emergency action was needed unless circumstances escalated. I had been dying, and her priority was to make sure the party stayed uninterrupted. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even text her. I forwarded everything to the hospital's compliance office and saved a copy to my desktop. Then I called my bank. I froze the trust fund my grandmother had left me. I had been told growing up that it was for emergencies only, but it turned out the emergencies had never been mine. Over the next few hours, I combed through years of account activity. Transfers I didn't authorize. Purchases I didn't make. Loans I never agreed to co-sign. All connected to my parents' and sister's accounts. They hadn't just taken advantage of me. They'd built a life on top of me, a glamorous, curated, picture-perfect life with beach photos, designer gowns, and charity galas. Every time I struggled in silence, working double hours or skipping vacations, they were siphoning off my future, one transaction at a time. That night, while the sun went down over the Santa Barbara hills, I opened my private journal and wrote a list. Not a revenge plan, not a meltdown, just names, dates, and boundaries I should have set years ago. I wasn't sure what the end of this story would look like yet, but I knew this chapter was over. The next morning, I sent one email to Savannah. It was 5 words long. I know what you did. Then, I blocked her number. I didn't expect a reply, but what I got instead was worse. A text from my mother. Can we not be dramatic? Savannah is overwhelmed. The venue for her engagement party just fell through. Can you help coordinate a backup location? I told her you'd know what to do. I stared at the message and felt something cold settle in my chest. My mother wasn't worried about what Savannah had done. She was worried about logistics. She wanted me to fix the broken machine like I always had, without asking questions, without making a scene. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Elena again. I want to update my will, I told her, and remove every family member from every document. There was silence for a moment. Then her voice came through clearly. Let's start now. The strange thing about betrayal is how quiet it feels when it finally sinks in. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just a cold sort of clarity that makes everything before it feel like a dream. You can't believe you stayed in for so long. After I removed my family from my legal documents, I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. I just moved silently. The way they always taught me a good daughter should. But even silence has a breaking point. A few days later, I was sitting at my desk trying to catch up on work when an email came through from the family's financial advisor. It was a forward from my father, flagged as urgent. He was requesting my signature on a bridge loan for one of his real estate ventures. In the same one, I had advised him to exit over a year ago. He hadn't responded to my hospital call. I hadn't checked on me once, since the surgery. And now he was asking for money as if nothing had happened. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the entire chain to Elena with a single question: is this grounds for legal intervention? Her response came within minutes. He's using your name to guarantee liabilities. We need to audit everything. That afternoon, she sent over a folder that made my stomach turn. It detailed account withdrawals, unauthorized authorizations, and evidence that my trust fund, set up by my grandmother before she passed, had been slowly drained over the course of 5 years. Thousands here, tens of thousands there, masked as shared family needs, but all tracing back to luxury purchases, Savannah's brand partnerships, and the mortgage on a house I didn't know they had bought in my name. I had worked full-time through college, picked up freelance contracts on weekends, and skipped vacations because they told me times were tight. I had believed them. I had believed every carefully worded text, every emotional call from Mom saying things are difficult right now, every teary moment when she said she was so proud of how responsible I was. But none of it had been true. They weren't broke. They just weren't spending their own money. No one noticed I was quieter than usual at work. He didn't push. He simply brought coffee to my desk and reminded me, gently, that I didn't owe anyone anything just because they shared my blood. That night, I opened a private cloud folder and started uploading every document I had: financial records, voicemails, screenshots, medical forms. Not for revenge. Not yet. Just so I wouldn't forget how far they'd gone to keep their world intact while mine almost ended on an operating table. Then came the engagement party announcement. A formal evite from Savannah's publicist. Not her personally. The event was to be held at a vineyard in Napa. Black tea only. And guests were encouraged to donate in lieu of gifts to a foundation Savannah had just launched in her own name. I laughed out loud when I saw the suggested donation amounts. The lowest tier started at $1. Ling. With higher tiers, offering things like private meet and greets with the couple. It was a brand activation disguised as a celebration, and I was listed on the website as family sponsor and financial benefactor. I hadn't agreed to any of it. I hadn't even been asked. I called Elena again. This time, with no emotion in my voice. Pull everything. Cancel anything that's linked to me. I want nothing under my name. She didn't ask questions. She just said, understood. The next morning, the calls started. First from my mother, then Savannah, then her publicist. I didn't pick up. They left voicemails filled with concern, confusion, passive-aggressive comments about misunderstandings, and emotional overreactions. One message from Mom ended with, "Bailey, please. You're ruining this for your sister. After everything we've done for you. That line sat in my head like poison. Everything they'd done for me. As if every moment of silence I'd swallowed. Every favor I'd granted. Every dollar I'd handed over. Was some kind of debt I owed back. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I just filed everything away and waited for the next crack to appear. It came 2 nights later when Jordan, Savannah's ex, messaged me, asking to meet. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. He said he found something I needed to see. Against my better judgment. I agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop near the marina. He looked tired. Thinner than I remembered. And when he slid his phone across the table, he didn't say a word. The screen played a voicemail from my mother. It was old, but her voice was unmistakable. I told Stephen this would happen. Bailey was never supposed to be permanent. She was the quiet one. Easy to manage. But now, she's watching too closely. I returned the phone without blinking. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because I stayed quiet too long. And because they're planning something bigger. Something involving your grandmother's estate." I didn't react. Not outwardly. But I knew then, without question. This wasn't going to end with a blocked number or a frozen account. It was deeper than that. And they had just made the mistake of thinking I was still willing to stay quiet. When I was 12, my grandmother took me aside after Sunday lunch and told me the lake house would be mine someday. She whispered it like a secret we had to protect. Her fingers wrapped around a chipped teacup. Her eyes sharper than her age suggested. "It's your sanctuary, Bailey, for when they forget how to love you properly." At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Now I understood she had seen everything long before I did. After meeting Jordan, I didn't go home. I drove straight to Elena's office with a folder full of questions and a pit in my stomach I couldn't shake. She had already started the preliminary audit on the trust account and my grandmother's estate. That day, she showed me the preliminary report. The lake house had been sold 3 years ago. Not rented. Not refinanced. Sold outright. The paperwork was buried under a shell LLC with Savannah listed as the contact signer. I don't remember what I said. Only that Elena reached for my hand when she saw my face. I think I stopped breathing for a moment. That house was the only place in my childhood where I had felt safe. It was where I hid after Savannah's tantrums turned violent. Where I did homework in the boathouse while my parents drank sangria on the patio. Where I once slept 3 nights in a row after Mom said I embarrassed her at a donor brunch by speaking too plainly. They didn't just take money. They took my history and erased it, like it was a receipt they could crumple and throw away. I asked Elena for full legal control over any asset tied to my name. I didn't want revenge. I wanted distance. I wanted to put up walls so tall and so clean that they would never again find a way to crawl back into my life through the cracks. Noah drove me home that night. I hadn't asked him to, but he showed up anyway with food and his usual quiet patience. "They sold the house," I said when we reached my building. He didn't ask which one. He just nodded. Like someone who already knew where the conversation would go. And they used my name. He waited a beat. "Then it's time. They learn what happens when you stop letting people write on your skin like it's paper." The next morning, I blocked every number I had once saved under family. I archived the emails. I called the hospital and submitted an official fraud report tied to the proxy signature from my surgery. I requested to be permanently removed as emergency contact from every institution I had once listed my parents on. Then I set a single meeting. I booked the gallery for my photo show and named it 73 Seconds. A private exhibition. Invitation. Only. Limited run. It wasn't about them. Not on the surface. But every image I curated had been taken in the quiet margins of my family's perfect life. Empty chairs at dinner tables. Blurred reflections in expensive mirrors. The hallway where I waited alone outside my sister's dressing room. The corner of my hospital room. IV bags lit by sunset. While I planned the show, Savannah launched a podcast. Her first episode featured a tearful monologue about resilience, spotlight pressure, and family complications. She never used my name, but she didn't have to. She painted herself as a misunderstood sister who tried to help but got pushed away. My inbox flooded with messages from her followers. Some sent hate, some sent prayers. Most assumed I had lashed out for attention. I didn't respond. I just added a photo to the collection. A close-up of the surgical incision across my side, stitched and swollen, backlit by hospital fluorescence. That week, I received another message from Jordan. He had gone back through old backups of Savannah's phone before moving out. He found audio files she never deleted. One was a recording of my mother, admitting, in no uncertain terms, that I was an accident. They dressed up in usefulness. I didn't flinch. I just listened. I had spent my whole life being useful. At school, at home, at work. And now they were angry. I had stopped being available like a light switch they could flick back on when the room got dark. I sent Elena the audio and asked her to begin drafting formal notice of legal disassociation. I didn't know if it would hold in court, but I wanted the record to show I had chosen to separate. I wanted a paper trail of my absence. I didn't want to be the ghost they used for sympathy. I wanted to be the woman they couldn't name without flinching. A week later, Mum left a voicemail. Her voice was brittle, controlled. Bailey, I heard you're planning something petty. Please think about how this affects the family name. We're still your parents. We still love you. I deleted it and looked out the window of my apartment, where the ocean shimmered with late spring light. I didn't feel petty. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt done. That kind of done you don't come back from. The kind where silence isn't a punishment. It's protection. The invitations to my exhibit went out quietly. No press. No sponsors. No vanity metrics. Just a private guest list of people who had stood beside me when there was nothing in it for them. I didn't invite Savannah. I didn't invite my parents. But I knew they would find out anyway. That was never in question. The question was how long it would take before they tried to turn it into something they could control. It happened faster than I expected. The gallery director called me 4 days before opening night to say she had received a media inquiry from a well-known lifestyle outlet, one that often featured Savannah's campaigns. The reporter claimed she was writing a piece on women reclaiming narrative and wanted quotes from me about the family element of the show. I told the gallery director to politely decline and to add security for opening night. Not because I expected a scene, but because I no longer underestimated how far they would go when they sensed attention slipping out of their hands. The morning of the exhibit, I received a flower delivery from a sender listed as Mom. It was a pale arrangement of white lilies and orchids, clipped so perfectly, I knew it hadn't been her choice, but her assistant's. The card read, "We're proud of you. Family above everything." There was no signature, no apology. Just a passive attempt to fold herself back into my story before the curtains went up. I left the flowers in the hallway for the building to deal with. By noon, Savannah had posted an Instagram reel wearing a black dress that looked suspiciously similar to the one I had planned to wear. Her caption read, "Excited to support artists who bravely share their truths. Grateful for sisters, even when they lose their way." The comments were full of speculation, sympathy, and her signature curated vulnerability. She'd turned my silence into her stage again. But this time, I didn't feel anger. I felt distance, and distance is a kind of power. Noah arrived early that evening to help with final setup. He didn't say much as we walked the exhibit, just occasionally paused in front of a photo and whispered, "This one is going to hurt them." The image of the hospital room. The final bank statement showing a zero balance in my trust. The childhood photo of me sitting alone on the dock while my family posed on the boat behind me. None of it was captioned. I didn't need to explain. The images spoke in the language I had never been allowed to use. The gallery filled slowly, then quickly. colleagues, clients, friends I hadn't seen in years. There were no speeches, no plaques declaring who I was. But as people moved through the space, the silence held weight. Toward the end of the night, I saw a familiar silhouette near the back wall. My mother stood with her sunglasses tucked into her neckline. Expression unreadable. Behind her, Savannah whispered to someone on her phone, then turned toward a piece showing my post-operative scans framed against a blurred shot of her award night. They didn't say a word to me. They just drifted through the gallery, taking in the damage like tourists visiting a war they had only ever watched from a safe distance. I didn't approach them. I didn't need to. They were surrounded by people who had once admired them, now staring at the truth through a glass frame. When they left, I watched from a second-floor window as Savannah pressed her phone to her ear and barked at someone while my mother dabbed at her eyes for effect. Neither of them looked up. Neither of them thanked me. But that wasn't the point. The point was, for the first time in my life, they were reacting to something they couldn't control. Later that night, I returned to my apartment and found 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. One voicemail was from my father, his voice softer than I remembered. "Bailey, your mom's upset. This isn't fair. We're still your family. Please don't shut us out. You're smarter than this." Another was from Savannah, barely masking her fury. "So this is who you've become, vindictive jealous. Do you feel better now?" The last message came from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "I never knew what they did to you. I'm sorry I didn't see it before. Your work. It's haunting. It's honest. Thank you for making it." I listened to that one twice. Then I put my phone down and stared out at the coastline, where the lights shimmered faintly across the water like a language I was only just learning to speak. That night, I slept for 9 hours without waking. No texts. No demands. No panic in my chest. The next morning, I woke up to a headline: "Local artists show pulls back curtain on family betrayal." The article didn't name me. It didn't have to. But it said one thing I never thought I'd read: Bailey McKnight's work doesn't scream. It whispers with precision. And that's what makes it unforgettable. I closed the tab, made a cup of coffee, and opened my email. Elena had sent final confirmation. All family names removed. All accounts locked. All legal ties severed. 2 days after the exhibit closed, Savannah's engagement was officially called off. It didn't make headlines, but I heard it anyway, through a mutual friend who worked in PR and owed me nothing. Jordan had left quietly. No announcement. No explanation. Just vanished from her curated feed, like he'd never existed. The only trace left behind was a hastily archived post and a new round of pity content that painted her as a woman wounded by family betrayal. My phone buzzed that morning with a screenshot. It was a Reddit thread titled, "Anyone else notice? Savannah McKnight is spiraling." The comments weren't kind. They weren't cruel either. Just observant. Someone had noticed her foundation's fundraiser had been paused. Another mentioned a lawsuit filed by a vendor over non-payment. And someone else posted a side-by-side comparison of her gala night and one of my gallery photos. The caption read, "There are 2 kinds of daughters in this world. Only one survives." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just closed the tab and opened my email. Elena had forwarded me an update. The bank had rejected a last-minute credit line application from my parents. Their financial statements showed consistent overdrafts, unpaid taxes, and frozen lines of credit. Their last remaining property, the condo they'd used for events, was now under lien. In short, they were unraveling. Slowly, messily, and most importantly, publicly. But I hadn't said a word. I hadn't written a single post or given a single quote. They were collapsing under the weight of their own design. That afternoon, my building's concierge called to let me know. Someone had left a package at the front desk. It wasn't flowers this time. It was a thick envelope. unmarked, hand-delivered. Inside were photocopies of emails I had never seen, printed texts between my mother and a lawyer, and a letter from Savannah's old manager confirming they had forged documents tied to my trust fund. The email trail showed exactly how the lake house had been sold. The forged signatures, the date stamps, the method. Whoever had sent it hadn't left a note. But I knew it wasn't an enemy. It was someone cleaning their conscience. I forwarded everything to Elena. Her reply came back almost immediately. Do you want to pursue them for fraud? I didn't answer right away. I went for a walk along the shoreline first, letting the breeze carry the question out of my body before it turned into revenge. Then I texted her back. Not yet. I want them to sit in it a little longer. Because I understood something now. People like my parents and Savannah don't break when they're exposed. They break when they're ignored. When they call and no one answers. When the show starts and they're no longer on stage. When the person they used to exploit for cover suddenly stops playing their part. So I didn't speak. I didn't respond to the dozens of missed calls. The new numbers. The voicemail from my father saying, "We're drowning. Bailey, you're punishing us." I just let them sit in the silence. The next day, a knock on my office door interrupted a meeting. My assistant popped her head in and said, "Your mother's here." I didn't lift my eyes. "Tell her I'm in back-to-back calls for the rest of the day." She hesitated. She said it's urgent. She's crying. I nodded. She cried the night I was in surgery too. Just not for me. My assistant backed out quietly and never brought it up again. They came again the following week. My father this time. He waited in the lobby for nearly an hour before leaving a handwritten note on the reception counter. "Don't forget who kept this family together." It wasn't a plea. It was a threat wrapped in sentiment. The kind he had always used. The kind that used to work. But now, the more they reached, the smaller they looked. Not powerless, but irrelevant. And that, I was learning, was the cruelest outcome for people obsessed with image. They weren't being dragged through court. They weren't being shamed on social media. They were simply being removed, edited out, omitted from the story they had once orchestrated. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and reviewed the final batch of estate documents Elena had sent. Every account tied to me was now sealed. Every loophole closed. She had also filed a cease and desist letter preventing my name or likeness from being used in any of Savannah's business content. No more tags. No more family photo ops. No more false unity for sponsors. I sat at my kitchen island, staring at the last page of the file. It was a short letter Elena had included at my request. A single sentence addressed to Savannah and my parents. "You may no longer speak for me." I didn't send it. I just kept it, printed it, framed it, not as a declaration of war, but as a certificate of exit. That night, my phone rang again. A new number. I let it ring until it stopped. Then I played back the voicemail. Savannah's voice, thinner than I'd ever heard it. "I can't fix this. You win, Bailey. I hope you're proud." I deleted it without replaying. There was no pride in watching someone fall, but there was peace in knowing I didn't push them. They tripped on their own lies. 3 weeks after the voicemail from Savannah, my phone stayed quiet for the first time in months. No blocked calls. No last-minute deliveries. No desperate letters left at the office. I thought maybe they'd finally stopped. Maybe the silence had settled in for good. But people like them don't stop when they've run out of words. They stop when they find a new angle. And I knew better than to believe peace was permanent when you're dealing with a toxic family dynamic built on guilt and performance. That Thursday, Elena called me before lunch. Her voice more clipped than usual. "You need to hear this before it lands anywhere else," she said. Then forwarded an email chain from her legal monitoring system. My parents had submitted paperwork to the hospital where I had been treated. They were trying to reclaim medical power of attorney. The same forged document Savannah had submitted the night I nearly died, was now being refiled. This time, with supporting statements from both of my parents. According to the paperwork, I was emotionally unstable, financially reckless, and under undue influence from outside parties. That outside party, I could only assume, meant Elena or Noah. I didn't speak for a moment. I just looked at the PDF and felt a stillness that wasn't fear. It wasn't even shock. It was exhaustion layered with clarity. They weren't trying to control my health. They were trying to access legal leverage over the one thing still in my name. My grandmother's final investment account. The one I hadn't touched yet. I had saved it for last. Quietly. Intentionally. Because it wasn't money to me. It was the last thing left that hadn't been stained by their hands. Until now. Elena was already filing a legal injunction before I had finished reading. "They're counting on your silence," she said plainly. "They think you won't fight this." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Then it's time I remind them who I became while they weren't looking." That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment and unpacked a box I hadn't opened since college. Inside were journals from my early 20s, scrawled with work stress, family obligations, and quiet little entries that all ended with the same sentence: "At least they still need me." That had been my currency, my relevance. If I couldn't be adored, I could at least be indispensable. It had never occurred to me that being needed and being valued weren't the same thing. I spent the weekend preparing statements, not for press, not for social media, but for court. Elena and her team had collected over 100 pages of documentation, audiofiles, transaction trails, digital forensics. My job was simple now: authorize, confirm, and testify when required. I didn't cry through any of it. I didn't laugh either. I just moved one document at a time, like someone cleaning out the attic of a house she no longer plans to live in. Monday came with a new letter, hand-delivered again. But not to my building this time. It arrived at my office. Inside was a single typed paragraph from my mother. Signed in pen, but clearly dictated to someone else. "You are not well. This public spectacle is hurting your career. We are your blood. We know what's best. Stop this now, before it ruins everything." No, I'm sorry. No mention of the trust fund theft, the forged signature, the house they sold behind my back. Just concern for appearances. Just the fear of losing control over the narrative they had spent decades polishing. I passed the letter to Elena. She read it twice and said nothing, then slipped it into her file without comment. Later that night, she emailed me, her reply, "Draft for court." I didn't change a word. By the following Friday, the court date was set. Emergency hearing, expedited. The hospital had already received my fraud documentation, and the medical board opened a quiet, internal review. I wasn't just defending my records anymore. I was cutting the final string. Noah drove me to the courthouse, neither of us talking much. When we arrived, he just looked at me and said, "You okay?" I nodded. For once, I am. Inside the hearing room, my parents sat side by side, carefully composed. My mother wore navy, understated but elegant. My father kept his head down, as if he was only there out of obligation. Savannah wasn't present, probably advised to stay away now that her name was directly linked to fraud. The judge reviewed the files for 25 minutes before speaking. Her ruling was short. The forged documents were inadmissible. My privacy rights had been violated. The motion to reinstate my medical proxy status to my parents was denied permanently. She looked over at me at the end and said, "You have the right to protect your autonomy. You exercised it well." My parents didn't look at me as they left the courtroom. No final words. No parting glances. Just retreat. Quiet. Clipped. Deliberate. That was the last time I ever saw them in person. Back in the car, Noah didn't say anything for a long time. Then, softly, he said, You didn't win by fighting. You won by outlasting. I leaned my head against the window and watched the city blur past. The silence wasn't for them. It was for me. It was what I had always needed, but only now had earned. 3 days after the hearing, I received an email from Jordan with the subject line, "You should see this." I hesitated before opening it. We hadn't spoken since he helped expose the trust fraud, and I wasn't sure what else there could be left to find. The email had no message, just 2 attachments. One was a scanned document showing that my grandmother's final investment account, meant to be untouched, had nearly been liquidated 6 months before her death. The other was an audio file. I listened with headphones on, sitting in the middle of my living room with the door locked. The voice was my mother's. It was a clipped conversation, recorded without her knowledge, probably from one of her old phone backups. She was speaking to someone in legal, discussing contingency plans if I ever turned difficult. Her exact words were, "Bailey will never go public. She doesn't have it in her. That girl lives to disappear for us." I didn't cry. I didn't even feel rage. I just sat there, staring at the wall, realizing that every quiet choice I'd ever made, every time I let something go, chose peace over confrontation, handled things behind the scenes, hadn't protected me. It had trained them. It taught them that I was disposable, predictable, safe. And now, when I'd finally chosen not to disappear, they were flailing. Not because I had attacked them, but because I had stopped performing the role they wrote for me. I called Elena. I told her to begin the process of formally reclaiming every remaining asset in my name, starting with a retroactive investigation into the illegal liquidation of that account. I wanted no theatrics, no public fight. I wanted documentation. I wanted silence that could hold up in court. Then I called Noah. "How do you feel about a vacation?" I asked. "Out of the country." He didn't ask where or why. He just said, "I'll clear my calendar." We left for Portugal 5 days later. I didn't post about it. I didn't update anyone. I left a message with my assistant that I was unavailable for the next 3 weeks and instructed her to reroute all non-work communication to Elena. On the flight, I turned my phone off for the first time in years. Not airplane mode. Off. Completely. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel nervous watching the signal disappear. Lisbon was calm. The air was warm even at night. And the sound of the city was nothing like California. Noah and I rented an apartment overlooking the river and spent our mornings in bookstores and cafes. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't bring up my family. We just lived in the moment. Something I hadn't allowed myself to do since I was a child. One evening, we climbed a hill to watch the sunset. I sat on a stone bench with a cup of wine in my hand, watching the sky turn from gold to lavender. Noah looked at me and said, "They'll never understand why you didn't come back." I nodded. "They don't need to. That's the point." Back in the apartment, I checked my email for the first time in days. Elena had sent over a complete report. The investment account had been drained slowly, in small increments, all within months of my grandmother's final hospitalization. The documents confirmed that both my parents had accessed the account using backdoor permissions granted through Savannah's company. The paper trail was airtight. Legal action was optional now, not necessary. My victory wasn't in reclaiming money. It was in proving they had no more access. Not to my name, not to my trust, not to my silence. As I read through each file, I felt something shift. This wasn't about damage control anymore. This was about declaration, not revenge. Not punishment, just truth. Quiet. Factual. Final. A closure that didn't require their apology to feel real. I closed the laptop, walked onto the balcony, and watched the river move with steady rhythm. I realized then that I had never needed to confront them directly. The confrontation was already happening every day. They woke up and realized I wasn't coming back to fix it. Every bill they couldn't pay. Every call I didn't answer. Every article they couldn't spin. That was the consequence. Not my anger. My absence. The next morning, I received a message from my cousin. A blurry photo of my childhood home with a foreclosure sign staked in the lawn. Her caption was short. "They're calling everyone. Blaming you." I replied. Of course they are. But I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel responsible. I hadn't burned the bridge. They'd set it on fire, and then asked me to carry the ashes. And I had finally learned to set it down. When I returned from Portugal, it was almost summer. The air in Santa Barbara had changed. Softer, quieter. I stepped into my apartment and realized nothing felt heavy anymore. The plants had survived. The inbox hadn't exploded. The world had gone on without demanding anything from me. And for the first time, I didn't feel behind. I felt like I had finally caught up with myself. Noah and I unpacked slowly. We took our time. There was no rush. No post-trip chows. Just a steady rhythm that had replaced the old, brittle tempo of obligation. I spent the first week back reviewing gallery offers. 3 curators had reached out during the trip, asking to feature selections from 73 seconds in group shows. One offer came from a museum in Denver. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't chasing visibility. I just wanted to move with intention. The kind of movement you only earn after letting the wreckage settle. A few days later, Elena called. "Your parents are trying to contact the press," she said calmly. "They're pitching a version of the story where you froze their accounts out of spite. They've left out the fraud, the forged signatures, the inheritance theft." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "Will it stick?" I asked. "Not legally," she said, "but it might generate noise." I thought for a moment. "Let them," I said. "Let them tell the story the way they need to in order to survive it." Silence stretched through the line. Then Elena's voice returned. Softer now. "Bailey, you know you don't owe them mercy." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "It's not mercy," I said. "It's disinterest." That weekend, Savannah released a podcast episode titled "The Cost of Estrangement." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. She spoke for 40 minutes about betrayal, family wounds, and what it means to lose a sibling to ambition. The comments were a mix of sympathy and side-eyes. A few listeners called her brave. Others questioned the timing. No one really knew what had happened. And that was what bothered her most. The silence. The control she no longer held. The following Monday, the foreclosure notice on my childhood home went public. It was a small article buried in the real estate section of a local paper. But someone sent it to me anyway. There was a photo. Faded shutters. Overgrown lawn. The porch where I used to sit with my grandmother eating oranges in the summer, now covered in peeling paint. A sign planted at the edge of the yard. No trespassing. I stared at it for a long time. Then I forwarded it to Jordan, along with a single line. "The final frame," he replied with a heart emoji. "Nothing else." That was enough. The next day, Noah handed me a thin folder while we had coffee on the balcony. Inside were documents for a new trust I hadn't asked for. One built with clean assets. No shared names. No fragile loopholes. Just mine. Uncomplicated. Quiet. He didn't say anything while I read it. When I looked up, he just said, "You don't have to start over. You already have." That afternoon, I booked a flight to Denver to walk the museum space in person. I didn't want to just send files. I wanted to stand in the room where my images might hang. I wanted to feel what it meant to show my work without showing my scars. And while packing, I found the old photo again. Me at 10 years old. Sitting on the dock, knees drawn to my chest, hair messy, eyes distant. Behind me, in the rest of my family laughing on the boat. That moment, captured by someone else, had become the blueprint. The quiet one, the background, the girl who always made room. I placed the photo in a folder labeled Origin. Not for display, just for me, because everything after that had been a choice. And choices, when made in silence, become power. The night before my flight, I stood by the window and watched the coastline flicker in the distance. My phone buzzed once. A new number. I didn't answer. I didn't even check the transcript. I powered it off and poured a glass of wine. I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I wasn't waiting for the next betrayal, the next manipulation, the next apology wrapped in a threat. They had nothing left to offer me, no narrative I needed to correct, no version I needed to contest. Their house was gone. Their reputation was unraveling. Their influence was slipping into the same silence they used to weaponize against me. But this silence didn't belong to them anymore. It was mine now. And it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like peace. I didn't return to the town where I grew up for a funeral, or for closure, or even to be seen. I went back because the museum exhibit in Denver had requested one more piece to close the cycle. A final frame. A closing chapter. Something that carried the quiet gravity of a beginning disguised as an ending. I knew exactly what that meant. So I drove 3 hours out of the city, turned down the familiar street lined with jacarandas, and parked across from the empty shell that used to be my childhood home. The foreclosure sign had been taken down, but the cracks in the concrete driveway and the shuttered windows told the same story. The grass had grown wild, curling around the porch steps like fingers, trying to hold onto something already gone. I stood there for a long time, holding the camera by my side, not because I needed a photograph, but because I needed a record. Not of the house, but of what I had walked away from and survived. I lifted the lens and snapped 3 frames. No staging, no edits, no filters, just stillness, the kind of silence that can't be faked. A car pulled up behind me, quiet, like it didn't want to be noticed. I knew who it was before the door opened. Savannah stepped out, her hair pulled back too tightly, her heels too expensive for gravel. She looked older than I remembered. Not in the way time marks a person, but in the way disappointment does. We stood there facing the house, neither of us speaking. Finally, she broke the silence. "You didn't even call when Dad had the stroke." Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even surprised. It was hollow, like she already knew the answer. I didn't look at her when I spoke. He didn't call when I died for 73 seconds on an operating table. So no, I didn't. She exhaled slowly, probably expecting that answer. Probably rehearsed for a softer version. "We're all we have left," she said after a moment. "Then maybe you should start treating that like a privilege, not a threat," I replied. She flinched slightly. "They're losing everything," she added. I nodded. They built everything on a foundation they didn't own. And they never expected it to collapse, because I always held the corners up. She turned toward me, eyes sharper now. "Is this what you wanted? To watch us fall apart?" I finally looked at her. "No. I wanted to stop bleeding for people who never noticed I was hurt. Everything else is just gravity." She didn't respond right away. She just looked at the house, then down at her phone, then back at me. "You're not the same." I shook my head. "No. I buried the version of me who made excuses for your choices. The one you were comfortable using." She took a step closer, but I didn't move. "I didn't think you'd ever leave," she said. "That's the problem," I answered. "You thought I was a fixture, but I was only ever a person." Her voice cracked slightly as she asked, "What now? We just never speak again." I didn't say anything at first. Then I lifted the camera, focused it on the front porch, and clicked once more. "What happens now?" I said quietly. "Is up to you. But what won't happen is me returning to a version of myself that only ever existed to make your life easier." She stayed there, motionless. As I walked back to my car, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some moments aren't meant to be revisited. They're meant to be documented, honored, and then left exactly where they belong. I drove straight to the gallery with the final image and handed it to the curator. She looked at the photograph, then looked at me, and simply said, "This is the one. This closes it." I nodded. Yes, it closes it. That night, I attended the opening quietly. I didn't speak on stage. I didn't stand near the pieces. I just moved among the crowd, listening to the way people responded to the work. Some whispered. Some stared too long. Some cried. But no one asked for the names. No one needed the story spelled out. Because it was never about the specifics. It was about survival. About finding your voice without raising it. About walking away without slamming the door. As I stood near the exit, a woman about my age tapped me on the shoulder. "You're the artist." "Right." I nodded. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Thank you." I didn't know someone else had lived through what I'm still in. I met her eyes and said the only thing I've ever really needed to say. "You can leave it behind. You're allowed to." She nodded, swallowed hard, and walked away. When I got home that night, I made tea, turned off my phone, and sat on the balcony. The wind was soft. The sky was clear, the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, but quietly stays when everything else has fallen away. And for the first time since that hospital room, since the moment my heart stopped, I felt completely alive. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to rewrite what happened. I just needed to remember that I had survived it. And now, every choice I made was mine, not theirs. Not the family name. Not the version of me they built to serve them. I died quietly, so I could live loudly. Now that I finally am, how do you begin again? Once you've let go of everything they swore you couldn't survive without.